Welcome to Melanated Rising, where we inspire, uplift, and ignite Black creatives, all while changing the narratives around Blackness. What does it mean to exist Black in this world today with our many intersections? That's exactly what we explore, the challenges, the beauty, and the brilliance. Every episode is a look at what is possible when Black creatives stand in our undeniable power. I am your host, Kristen Iris.
And I'm L'Erin Alta.
Welcome back to the show. We are here for another episode of Melanated Rising, and I am so excited to have L'Erin here with us. She is a personal growth facilitator for women through workshops, retreats, and one-on-one intensives. She teaches women how to stand in the brilliance of their own light so they always feel seen for who they really are and not just what they do. The goal of her work is for women to harness their own power and live boldly in their personal truths. She's known for burning down the stale, fluffy, boring self-help formulas and helping women ignite true personal liberation. You guys know liberation is my thing. So thank you for joining us today, L'Erin. How are you?
I'm fantastic. How are you?
I am doing good. And you are in Thailand, correct?
Thailand.
Yeah, so you've been staying there for a couple of months now?
Yep, I've been here. I just went to Burma yesterday to get my visa extension, so I've now been here officially 3 months.
Oh, all right. How fun. All right, so I like to start with a question, and the question that I am going to ask you, that I ask everyone, is what narratives around Blackness are you currently changing or challenging?
I'm not actually changing or challenging any narratives around Blackness. I am just being Black, and whatever people do with that or don't do with that is up to them. But my only intention with a narrative around Blackness is to be my full expression, my full self. And then, I don't consciously think about what stereotypes I'm breaking or what assumptions I'm challenging, because that is takes a lot of time and energy. And I'd rather just be who I am and have people deal with their own assumptions and challenges and stereotypes. But for me, I'm just interested in living as free and as whole and as true and as present as I possibly can.
I love that. Now, something you just said that was interesting is that like other people's assumptions, that you just like let them deal with that. And I think that's really, I think it can be challenging, but it's really important, is like what other people think about us, like what other people think about me is like not actually my business.
Yeah, not at all.
Yeah, like unless it is somehow like impacting me or holding me back in like a real world sense, that they're like doing something against me, and then I get to concern myself with their actions. But like what people actually think is not really my business.
Exactly. That's exactly it.
So for you, is this something that you had to grow into at all, or just kind of what has been your experience with this in terms of just like showing up as you are and really being in that power of yourself?
No, this is just who I am. Thank God. And this is who I was always supported and raised to be. I'm from Seattle, so I was often one of very few Black children in a classroom, but I was intentionally raised in a Black community that, thanks to gentrification, doesn't exist anymore. But I was raised, I'm first generation out of the South. So I was raised, my mother's from Texas, and I was raised in a community of Black people whose children are also first generation out of the South. So Texas, Louisiana, Arkansas. One family, like we call ourselves the Village, is from Compton, but the rest of us, for the most part, are first generations, with Southern parents in Seattle. So it was intentional for them as Black people who had been raised around and loving Black people to be raised in a community of Black people who loved each other and loved themselves. So I was raised, everything I did outside of school, community, my neighborhood, school, church, before school, after school, was very much in a Black informed environment. And for things that we did, there was a black ski club. So I grew up skiing, and people will say, oh, black people don't ski. And I'm like, yeah, they do. And I grew up skiing. So you can butt that stereotype. Or, black people don't travel. I've been to 24 countries. Not only have I been to 24 countries,
Ooh.
my mother and her brothers are all travelers. And not only are my mother and her brother travelers, my grandmother was an international traveler and spent time in Asia. And, she was born in the tens. So for me, it was really about who are you and how can you be who you actually are? That's the messaging that I was raised with. Now, of course, there were some, guidelines, which were like, you go to college and there's certain expectation, not just like kick it, do whatever you want to do, freestyling, which I would have loved that permission that I ended up giving myself later. But in terms of like Blackness, I didn't grow up with this idea of what Black people do or don't do. I was not, that was not a restriction that was put on me because of race.
Yeah. So it's interesting because as you were talking, you're like, people say Black people don't ski, and you're like, actually we do. And so it sounds like in your experience, like you just didn't have these confines until like later, when people tried to when people would say things and you'd be like, that's false. That's not actually the case for Black people.
And it wasn't even confines. It was just like people would say stupid things in passing, right? Like, oh, Black people don't do this. And I'm like, they do actually, so it wasn't, I never took it on. I never personalized it. I never made it about me. I just was always crystal clear that was their limited understanding of Blackness, and that it had nothing to do with me or actually them. Like it was just a lie that they internalized that was really more about unlearning than anything else.
Yeah. Okay. That sparked something in my brain just now, and then I lost it. Like as I was I was like, wait, no. Oh, it was about internalizing it. And I think that's the thing when it comes to narratives or the ideas around Blackness, is like the way people impose them on us. It's like you can internalize it, or you could just kind of like reject it and be like, no, that's not even true. And it sounds like your upbringing was in a way that you didn't have to internalize it because you had this really solid foundation of just who you were and this growing up in Black community. And just in things that I've heard from other people who grew up in different areas or like predominantly white areas, it's just like a completely different story where they're like, yeah, these were the things that we were told, or we're not supposed to act this way, or, just all these kind of limiting things that like grew in them, like this seed that turned into this tree that became like how they show up in the world. And so I think it's just it's really beautiful the way that your parents kind of set you up to not even have that.
Well, I mean, it's both and, right? Like I said, I grew up in Seattle, so I did definitely grow up in a very white place. It wasn't, but the people who raised me were very intentional that my world was not going to be white centered. And I think that's the distinction. I think because so much of Blackness is about respectability politics and blending in and, making sure that you're a good Black or whatever that means, that you can center whiteness and have your identity as a marginalized, how do I kind of not stand out? And that, we were going to stand out whether we wanted to or not. And so I think the biggest blessing for me was that I was raised by Black people who love Black people. And I was raised by Black people who love being Black.
Yeah.
And so so I didn't have any shame or guilt or embarrassment around it. Now, I remember this consistently because it was a consistent thing that like, if we were in a grocery store and there was a good song on, I would dance just because I would, as a child, and I would feel, moved to dance. And so my mom would be like, oh, no, don't dance in public. Right. So I think that's part of not because she was anti-Black, but because she knew she didn't want me to be perceived as being whatever her own stuff around that was. So that is just like one example that I can think of off the top of my head, but it was never from a place. And this, I think, is also about class privilege. Like I grew up with a lot of class privilege, which gave me access in a way that some people, so I didn't have to be mindful of respectability in the way that some people have to around Blackness. It gave me more access and more freedom. But I think also the conversation, and I didn't know that this was unusual until I was an adult, that the conversation that I grew up with, not just in my house, but in my community, was cross class, and was loving Black people cross class, was loving Black people cross experience, was loving Black people cross nationality or background or religion or sexual orientation, that it was just like, we love Black people, period. That's like the whole sentence. That's the book. That's the chapter. We put it back on the shelf. Like so there wasn't any like, oh, we're not like those Black people. We're like, no, we are like them too. Like all of us are Black, and we love each other, and we're in this together. And that, I think, is the biggest message and lesson and gift that I was given.
Oh my gosh. I feel like that's such an important thing. And so I don't want to say rare, because obviously this was an experience that you had, but I feel like that we're often pitted against each other in ways of like this hierarchy of like who's more respectable and who's like more, who's I can't think of the right word. It's like a D word in my brain, but like looked down on, and this ranking of each other. And it's like, when we actually have that love across, when we get rid of the hierarchy and just start seeing each other and loving each other, I feel like so much is going to be able to change on a societal level.
Totally. Absolutely. I agree.
So your work is with women and in helping them, ignite that true personal liberation. How did you come to doing this work?
So I've been doing the work that I do for over 20 years. I actually started in college facilitating transformational workshops and retreats, and I kind of stumbled upon it. It was not intentional. This was the late 90s, and it was open mics were all the rage. Love Jones had just come out, and I wanted to go to open mics. So I went to open mics, and these women would get on the mic and tell the stupidest, most boring poems in the world. And they weren't stupid or boring because they were poorly written, but they were all like the same poem after poem after poem, because they were just getting on the mic to like get a date. It was just like, he licked my earlobe and my body melted. And I was like, girl, this is so boring. We just heard this poem from someone else. Don't you have something else to say? And so I created what was called Sister Fire, which was an all women open mic. No men were allowed in the audience. No men were allowed on the mic. It was just all women in conversation. And I went to Spelman, so I went to an all women school, and you would think that there would be more all women spaces, but there were not. So I created one, and it really turned into this powerful transformational community, because women needed a space to tell their own truth, and they needed a space to not be performing and not be on. And what happened was, the very first time I did it, we did, people came and did their poems, did their songs, and it was cute. And then someone came on the mic, and she changed the whole entire game for the rest of my time there. And it's continued in the years since I've been gone. But she came on the mic and said, I don't have a poem. I don't have a song to sing, but I have herpes and I have nowhere else to talk about it. Mm. And in that moment, the room changed. She broke the glass of just being a nice open mic and told the truth, right? And gave everyone their permission to tell the truth. And then you could see, it was like everyone could breathe, like everyone could relax, and people met her where she was. And from that moment, people continue to tell stories and sing poems and, do all that stuff. But people also would come out on the mic or talk about being raped or sexually assaulted. People would talk about abortions. People would talk about falling in love. People would talk about everything. And it became this space of deep healing and deep, transformation that I had to really step into as a leader, to learn how do you hold space? How do you witness? How do you move the energy of all these people in this room and create a container? And so we would start at 7:30 on the third Thursday, and would go until midnight. And it was just this powerful boot camp for me to like really step into my gifts as a healer and a teacher and a facilitator. And then of course I've, taken trainings and done all kinds of stuff over the years to really hone and strengthen my skills. But that is where I started.
Wow. That's so as an artist, this hearing this story about that, it started in this like open mic space where, there's, I guess, finger quotes, supposed to be a creative expression. Like that's sort of the idea, is that there's this creative expression, and you're seeing this like lack of true expression, and creating this other space for, art or creativity that just transformed into that and more. And this place for people to be real. And I feel like we need more spaces like that in general, like more spaces like that where we can, because so many of us are walking around feeling like I'm here, nobody's really seeing me, and I don't have someone to talk to. And when we have these spaces, it creates that kind of, container and dynamic to be like, all right, I am allowed to show up and be seen. I am allowed to show up and be heard, and to also be that person who is seeing and hearing someone as they are and as they're coming to you, and not just like as you think they are.
Totally. I mean, during those, I facilitated for about 2.5, 3 years. And then when I graduated, or 4 women, I like handpicked 4 women to take it over. And then they graduated, they handpicked 4 women. So it really continued. And then it like came back a couple of years later. And I've actually had students reach out to me in the like couple months ago, and they want to bring it back again. But I say all that to say, yes, exactly what you're saying. We need this. I had people tell me that this is what they thought Spelman was going to be like. They had Sister Fire kept them from taking their life. Like, this is the healing that they needed, that they weren't getting in therapy. Because we're communal people. We need community. And my deep philosophy is trauma doesn't happen in isolation, and neither does healing. And so we need to witness and be witnessed, but we don't know how to do it often without a catalyst. And so really poetry and music and performance was just what got people in the door. Because if I was like, come on, let's just sit and witness with each other, it's not quite as appealing, but it's what got them in the door. And once they were there, and that's why I say I really had to step into my gifts as a facilitator, because I had to learn, how do you create sacred space? What is ritual? How do you I knew in some ways what ritual was, but I had to do it. I had to lead it, which I hadn't done before. And the beautiful part is that I was never, even though I created and I facilitated and I ran it for years, I was not in charge per se. It was a community gathering, and everyone had a role. And as the time evolved, we had what we called like the center where you sit. It's called the womb. And so we had one woman who's an artist, who's a visual artist, amazing painter and textile artist. And she's still to this day an artist. She was at Spelman for art. And so she would come in early and set up the space with like fabric and textiles and all of these different things that she would create the space. And we had everyone just took, and I never asked her to do that. Maybe I did. I don't remember actually, but maybe initially, or maybe she just took it on as how she wanted to contribute. And so over time, everyone participated. And I had some people who came every Sister Fire for years and never spoke. And I had people who came every Sister Fire for years and spoke every time. So there was room for however you wanted to show up. And to echo what you're saying, we need that space because we're so performative, we're so goal driven. Sometimes we don't know how to just be.
Yeah, to just pause, not just constantly be in the rush. And I feel like that's challenging for a lot of us as we're, trying to excel or trying to survive, even just trying to survive in the world is, feeling like you're not allowed to pause. You're not allowed to even take care of yourself, especially for women, in not being able to pause and take care of yourself. What's been your experience with that, with like the people that you work with?
Well, I try to move away from the pause idea because pause often, I often work with high achieving, super driven, ambitious women. And my work right now is focusing on empaths. So most of my students and clients are empaths who are very sensitive, super sensitive, emotionally, energetically, physically. And so they take on a lot of other people's stuff because they don't often have, healthy boundaries, and they have a very sensitive neurological system. And so when we think about pause, it's like, okay, I'm done pausing. Now I'm going to go back to what I was doing before. And we just go like, it's like an on and off switch.
Okay.
Right. And so I much more promote, how do you integrate pause throughout your whole day? How do you weave it into everything that you're doing? And how do you breathe through the process? So that it's not about an on and off, but it's about being holistically present and maybe slowing down to go faster. And because how you be informs how you do. And that's the focus. We just live in a society that has it backwards, that thinks that how you do then informs how you get to be. And it's not. It's how you be informs how you do.
Yes. Oh my gosh. And that unwriting of that idea is so challenging, because it's informed for so long how we're allowed to show up in the world and what we're allowed to do. Mm-hmm. So now in your work, so you use, I believe I read this, you use ritual and different ancient practices.
Mm-hmm. Ritual. I use ritual, breath, movement, meditation, writing, and different spiritual practices, depending on the person I'm working with or the group or what I'm doing, to create sacred space and to create transformation.
Okay. Now there was something as I said before we got on, I don't remember what it was, what post it was that you had, but it was, or maybe you even commented on a post, but it really I was like, oh, that's what I'm doing right now, or that's what I'm trying to do. And it was about connecting to our ancestors. And I feel like for me, especially as someone of the Black diaspora, and kind of having a little bit like a disconnect from my ancestors, like I don't know exactly where, we are a scattered people. I don't know exactly where my lineage comes from. I don't know like my exact history all the way back. All the way back could go a really, really long way, but I don't know even very far back. And so this idea of connecting to the ancestors and what that does for us, that was something I was sort of starting on that journey then, that I've definitely been stepping more into. But what is your experience with that, or your thoughts on the power of connecting to our ancestors, in particular as people of the Black diaspora?
I think about this a lot because, like you, I'm a child of the African diaspora in the United States, which is a very specific and unique experience. Even though the African diaspora has gone all over the world through enslavement and trade and other things, but I think different parts of the world have dealt with that differently, and in particular, being the descendant of slaves and enslaved people, where there was no memory, that so much has been lost, and that it makes me sad and it pains me, because we are a rich people, and to have such a disconnect in the like tactile sense of the word, it makes me sad, and it's just a big loss. But I've just given myself permission to claim it all. I just claim the whole diaspora. I claim everything and everyone, and think about those as my ancestors. And then there are certain ones that I have a specific soul connection to, or heart connection to, or just they've been great teachers for me. And so I think about them specifically, but I think it's a disservice. I remember being in middle school, or maybe it was high school, and one of my classmates, whose father actually was the African-American history teacher, was like, I'm not African-American, I'm Black, because I only know, being Black in America. And I'm like, yeah, that's fair. And just because that's the only thing you know doesn't mean that's the only thing that there is. Mm-hmm. So I think for me, it's important to like claim my lineage, even if I can't name it, but to claim it. And so anytime I do ritual work, or anytime I call in the ancestors, I always say those named and unnamed, those known and unknown, because I know I will never know. And that doesn't diminish their presence or their value or their importance.
Oh, so the named and unnamed and known and unknown, that is, so when I've been connecting and like trying like say praying to the ancestors or things like that, I've kind of felt a little jumbled there to be honest, where I'm like, but I don't know who my ancestors are. Like, I don't know who I'm talking to right now. I just know that they are there and they are with me, and I am, and I am tapping into, their wisdom and a lot, like letting them, being like, okay, guide me. And so that feeling of like, sometimes I'm like, how exactly do I navigate this? How do I speak to them when I don't know who I'm speaking to? How do I let them know? It's felt a little bit jumbled and fumbly, and I'm kind of just letting myself fumble through it and be in process with it and let myself learn with it. But I think you just cleared up something for me as far as how I can approach that in a way that feels like, okay, I am opening up and I am welcoming, and not just like, oh, what do I do?
Yeah, definitely. And if you trust them as like, and this is, some people have different philosophies about, some people are like, not all ancestors are benevolent, not all ancestors are great. And I'm like, I claim them all because, not, and they're also not all evil, so whoever, they all were necessary to get me here, like every single one of them. So I just am grateful for all of them. So maybe it's also about just approaching it from a place of like gratitude and receptivity, and just being like, I'm here, and I don't, and you're here, and let's just be here together, like without having to name it or like make it tangible, but just like being open. And however you want to show up, ancestors, I'm here, and I love you, and I'm grateful, and thank you.
Mm. Yeah, that could work. Now, what you said about how people have different philosophies, and not all of your ancestors, or not all of our ancestors were like benevolent or necessarily like good people. And I've kind of wondered about that in this connection, is like how, like the ancestors were, they were just like us, like they were people existing and, they had human lives and they made mistakes, and some of them may not have necessarily, I can't think of the right phrasing for it, but dealt with certain mistakes or certain bad decisions or things like that. And it's like, there's a little bit of a question of like, do I want guidance from this person who might have been like an abuser, even though I don't know who this person is? And so how do you, I know you say you claim them all, but like, did you have to kind of reconcile with that, or how did you sort of tackle that in terms of like accepting guidance?
Well, I don't, it wasn't something I had to reconcile with, because my philosophy is that when you are no longer in the physical form, you're no longer human. So all of these kind of like human limitations or understandings or judgments or analysis or interpretations that we put on them, it has nothing to do with who they are in spirit. And so for me, once they go back to source, they're part of source, they're part of the infinitude, they're part of infinity, they're part of the source beyond source, they're part of the continuum of life, like that's, and again, not everybody sees or interprets it that way, but that's for me. So I'm like, I don't necessarily pray to them, I pray to God, but in my kind of cosmology, they are there, they're guides, they're teachers, they are examples, they are looking out for me, so maybe like angels, I guess. So they're, like, so it's like a relationship, but it's more so like, that's why gratitude and thank you is what I always go back to. Thank you for your sacrifice. Thank you for your life. Thank you for your, whatever you had to do so that I could be here. Thank you for your generosity of spirit. Thank you for whatever, because there's the like a adage, good news, bad news, who knows, so maybe they were, so for example, my uncle, my mother's brother, was born out of rape. Right. And so, who am I to say, oh, my grandfather who did rape my grandmother was this horrible person? Maybe not. I'm not interested in being the judge, but I'm grateful my uncle is here. You know what I mean? So it's like, I have to like constantly take a step back and not get into my human kind of binary, good, bad, right, or wrong, but like I'm still grateful. And so without my grandfather, regardless of the means, because I can't do anything about that, my uncle is here and I'm grateful. And because of my grandfather, I'm here, so and he had his own trauma that he was dealing with and his own horribleness that he had experienced in his life, and not to justify anything, but I leave that to God, like I leave the rest of that to God, and I can just be like, I'm grateful for the lineage that I'm part of and all of my ancestors.
Yep. That makes sense. The way you said it. And it's, I think, a really great thing about this is that people, like you said, not everybody has like the same philosophy as you or the same maybe like methodology or the way they do it. And so I think that's one of the great things about this is that our ability to connect is we can find a way, we can kind of navigate the way that makes sense for us individually. There is no like right way to do it or a wrong way to do it. It's like we get to find the way that works for us, that allows us to feel that connection and to, build from that in that spiritual connection.
Totally. And I think a lot of us who come out of a very dogmatic, binary, good, bad, right, or wrong Christian church or Christian spiritual upbringing can superimpose that. And as we like step out of it, we're like, oh, I'm just going to take that same way of approaching spirituality and apply it to the next thing I'm doing. And it's like, no, it doesn't have to be that way. Like if you look at Yoruba religion, for example, that came out of West Africa and is practiced in different ways with different names throughout the African diaspora and the Caribbean, the cosmology of that isn't really about good, bad, right or wrong, heaven and hell, God and the devil. It's like there all of the deities or the orishas in that spiritual practice have shadow and light, which I think is a more generous way of looking at it. Like they all have strengths and challenges. They all have ways of being in the world that may be useful at times and maybe harmful at times. And I mean, and that's true in many different cosmologies, but I like naming that one because it's of the African diaspora.
Yes.
And so when we look at that, then it's like, oh, then it also gives us grace and permission to see ourselves with more love and complexity and not be so judgmental and hard on ourselves, because we're like all doing the best we can. And then we just keep learning how to do better.
Yes. I'm actually really glad you mentioned that one because it's, so like I said, I don't have like I'm part of a scattered, like I don't know my lineage, but my older sister knows a lot more and she studies it more because this is in her field, in her profession. And so Yoruba is something that she mentions and I'm just like, man, I got to go learn more about that. 'Cause I'm sure we have a connection. And what you just said, so I grew up Catholic and I was raised Catholic. And so which is very, very dogmatic and like good, bad. And like, if you're not like pristine, then you're going to hell kind of thing. And so I went from there to just like, okay, I'm not like, that doesn't feel good for me, and sort of just dabbled in different spirituality, which was primarily through like an Anglo-centric lens or traditions or ideas, because that's what was easier to find really when I'm searching the internet at like 15 years old. And so that's what I got. And so I moved a little bit more into like paganism and Wicca, which is all like very Eurocentric. And then I was like, this doesn't feel like, it doesn't fit me anymore. Like this doesn't, maybe it didn't fit me at all, but like, it didn't feel like, I started like losing my connection to it. It didn't feel quite like it was right for me because it was not from my lineage. And so I've kind of traced myself away from the good, bad, heaven, hell to now it's my spirituality is much more fluid and doesn't really follow any particular tradition, but knowing what you said about Yoruba and that there's like light and shadow to all of the orishas. As you were talking about that, I'm like, oh, that really reflects more of like humanity.
Right.
Really
exactly.
a much better reflection of humanity. And if we actually embodied that more, I feel like we would be more forgiving of each other. And I don't mean excusing like horrendous things that happen, but I mean just more forgiving of like understanding like, oh, okay, this is, we are whole complex human beings. We don't have to always strive for like this super pristine image, and anything that's not that is this like evil thing that lives in us that you have to eradicate. You know, it creates that space for us to see more of the vastness of humanity as actually human, and not as something that we have to look away from or try to like weed out of somebody.
Totally. Absolutely. That's exactly it.
So I love it. So thank you for sharing that.
And something that you might be interested in too, especially since you grew up in Catholicism, is Santeria, which is another expression, but is more related to Catholicism in that relationship.
Yes, and you know it's funny because like my sister, my sister knows more about Santeria, and I actually know somebody who is, I don't know the proper terms, but who practices Santeria. And the connection to Catholicism is actually the thing that makes me like about it, because I have such a tumultuous relationship with Catholicism and Christianity, and like the hypocrisy and things that I saw. And so it's like I want, you know, like I want to learn more about it in terms of like, oh, there's a connection here in my history and my people's history, but also like I'm not sure I guess I would want to learn more about it, but it's there is a little bit of like a resistance there because of its connection to Catholicism. I'm kind of like, let's go to anything away from that. Which is my own stuff. That's my own stuff.
And maybe it's not, your thing, but it's you're on a journey, like we're all on a journey. It doesn't have to be baseball, like going from one base to another, to another, to another. It's like, it's just a journey. Like, it's just like an exploration. And I think when we shift that mentality to like, you don't have to find the thing, but maybe there is a thing, like I used to not say God. I used to, when I was kind of in a similar place to you, I was like, okay, Christianity was great growing up, and now I want to like explore all these other things. And I did, and I stopped saying God. And that was my journey. But for me, in those years, there was always something missing. There was always something, a disconnect. And it wasn't until I came back to saying God, not even identifying as a Christian or anything like that, but even though I think Jesus is great and the Bible is a wonderful text, I think Jesus is a great master teacher, and the Bible is a great text and is really interesting and has a lot of wonderful things in there. But I don't think of Jesus as Savior. But even when I came back to saying God, it was like a homecoming, and it was like the way I think about it is like English is my first language, and I speak French. But French will never be my first language. And when I speak English, it's a different understanding. It's a different depth. It's a different nuance. I can communicate in a way that I can't communicate in French because I know it so intimately. And that's how I felt when I reclaimed God in my own way, in my own relationship, in my own understanding.
Ooh. Yeah, I'm where you used to be. Like I don't use God. I don't I don't have like I don't use God. And so, for me, it still has that really strong, like Christian connection that I'm just like, I don't subscribe to your Christian God. And so for me, it's like, I'm not using that term, and it's interesting because I still have that association when other people use that term. And that's not necessarily what they even mean. And so it's like, I have to remember sometimes to check myself and my own assumptions about what people are saying or what people mean. And that, I don't know why that just made me think of this, like a little story from my best friend. It was something she saw online, and she's like, well, I just feel like, he didn't have to impose his religion. I'm like, I get what, and me, like, I am totally like, don't impose your religion on other people. Like, I am very much about that because that has happened to me. But when I was looking at it, I'm like, I don't actually think that's what he's doing in this situation. Like, we're making an assumption about his beliefs in God. And usually when someone, like, I have that not as strong an averse reaction as she does, but like I have a response of like, are you telling me what God is? Are you telling me who God is? And then I have to like the way people speak is in this kind of absolute, like, oh, everyone believes in God, or everyone believes in God in the same way, which is why I don't use it. And so it was one of those moments where like, I'm always kind of like that, like, oh, are you imposing this idea of what your idea of God is on me? And in that moment, I was just like, I don't know that that's what's happening right here. Like, maybe we should just take a step back.
Yeah. I think what you're naming is the most important part. Like, once you can start separating your shit and your projections from someone else's things, that's freedom. But that then gives you 100% responsibility for dealing with your own shit. You know, like, then there's no one else to blame. There's no one else to project on. There's no one else to like make the bad guy. Then you're like, oh, I've got some church hurt, or I've got some trauma around God, or I've got, and that's my stuff. I could say God all day, you know, and has actually nothing to do, like we said at the beginning of the call about race, it has nothing to do with anyone else other than my own experience and my own way of talking about something that's greater than me.
Yes. Yeah, talking about something that's greater than you. And so to backtrack to what you were saying about the ancestors is, I'm trying to remember exactly what you said, but that this returning to source, like the ancestors returning to source. So while you have like this kind of like gratitude and thanks for them, does your idea of like ancestors kind of meld together with your idea of God?
No.
Okay.
I mean, but kind of like in the sense that they are no longer in flesh and form. But I think God is everything. I think God is everything and everywhere, which I think God is nature, God is breath, God is people, God is ancestor. You know, like for me, there's not like this is God and this is not God. God is the plants, God is everything. You know, the Bible says in the beginning there was the Word and the Word was God, right? And so for me, like the Word is God. Everything is an expression of the divine. And I believe that, you know, humans are all here having an experience as expressions of the divine, like experiencing itself in human form. So the ancestors are part of this infinitude, part of this continuum, part of this infinity that I don't necessarily know how it all maps out in the details, which I don't actually care. My interest is, how do I be here now? Like, how do I be my full self right here, right now? What is supporting me in my full self expression? And how do because part of, I think what can happen is, and this has happened to me in those years when I wasn't saying God, part of that was also like believing kind of this new age idea that about like self, you know, in some spiritual circles, it's blasphemous to talk about a higher power, which is ironic and weird to me. Like, you can't say God or spirit or source or creator or whatever because it's about you and manifesting. And I'm like, no, like, that's not it. There's something bigger than me, and we co-create. But it's not just my will, which can get into this realm of spiritual arrogance. And I think, you know, like, oh, I'm going to manifest this because I want this. I'm like, no, boo, maybe it's not for you to have. Maybe it's not your time. You know, like, I believe in divine timing. I believe that's why it's something bigger than me. I'm not in charge. And I think part of what gets caught up in this, like, spiritual world that we live in now, this kind of like pop culture spiritual world, is we pick and choose what feels good to kind of like the ego and capitalism, and we exploit it and call it spiritual. And I'm much more interested in a deeper, richer, more powerful, co-creative relationship with the one that created me, that requires me to be humble, because I don't know everything and I'm not in charge. And there were years when I had bought the hype, and I don't buy into anymore. I'm much more interested in devotion and obedience, and not again from this religious dogmatic way, but from like prayer and meditation and intuition and listening, and then trusting my intuition more than I trust anybody or anything outside of myself. And I think my intuition is the voice of God, right? So I just said a lot, but
no, I love it.
How I think about it.
I love it. I love it. There are so many like they're not little, but things in there that I'm hit on, like things that I myself am starting to step into. So like the intuition, like I've been working for the last year and a half-ish, a little less, on like really honing in on my intuition. Cause a year and a half ago, I was like, oh, I'm not intuitive. Like that's other people. That's for other people. I'm not intuitive. I'm too analytical. And it wasn't that I wasn't intuitive. It was that I didn't trust myself.
That's exactly
it. So I now, like, I've spent this time, because there were a couple people who were like, you're really intuitive. Like I get this sense about you. And I'm like, this person doesn't know what they're talking about. And so then I started to realize, like, wait a minute, I do have intuition. I have a really strong intuition. I need to learn how to trust myself. And then that led into, like you were talking about divine timing, is this trusting the timing. Now this year, like, the beginning of this year has been a big, like, trust the timing, because things just from jump were not going on the timing I planned. And I was like, you know what? That's okay, because whatever this timing is right now is what it's supposed to be. And I'm going to keep moving forward with what I'm doing. And I'm going to trust the timing, and I'm going to trust myself, and I'm going to trust the ancestors. And
totally.
It has definitely worked for me, that trusting the timing. But, another thing that you said there was about like manifesting, how like that new agey manifesting, like I'm gonna will this into existence. And oh my gosh, I'm at the point now where I'm starting to hate the word manifest. Now manifest was my, like I do a word for the year. That was my word for 2017. Okay. Manifest was my word. And now I like almost hate the word, because I hate the way people use it. And sometimes I've seen people where they're like, well, I'm having trouble manifesting because I don't know how it's going to happen. I was like, okay, well, what is it that you're trying to manifest? And they like say what it is. And I go, okay, well, what steps are you doing to make that happen? They're like, nothing. I just put it out in the universe and I'm waiting for it to happen. I'm like, what?
That ain't it.
I was like, okay, that is not what manifesting is. Like, even at that time, I was still like, that is not what manifesting is. Like, you can't just like will things. That's like putting something out there or thinking something and then expecting people to just do it for you. Like, what? Like, people have such a convoluted idea about what manifesting is. Like, talk a little bit about that.
That's why I say co-create. To me, it's the same thing. But co-create reminds me that I'm not sitting here doing it by my will. Like, I'm in communion and in relationship with the one who orchestrates the universe, not the universe, the one who orchestrates the universe. So, because if you look at it, we live in a universe, but there are multiverses. There are universes throughout our whole solar system, galaxy. I don't know what's bigger and smaller, but I know there's more than one universe. So for me, I don't put my right, there's something created the universe says, right? So then for me, it's like, I'm co-creating with that. And so we can call it manifesting, we can call it whatever we want to call it, but it's like, have you prayed about it? Have you meditated on this? Is this for you to make? Like, is this your calling, or is this your ego thinking, oh, I need to get so-and-so amount of followers, so I'm manifesting this, or I'm manifesting this job, or I'm manifesting. No, boo. Like, when you can get humble, then you'll get bigger. Like, and by bigger, I mean, like, you'll get what's actually yours. It won't be swimming upstream. But when you can, like,
oh my gosh, that's how it feels.
It is how it feels.
It's like, oh my gosh, I'm trying so hard. I'm trying so hard.
Because that's all ego, right? And not to say that now, I'm a Taurus. I love to work hard. I love to work hard, and I work really hard and when I work, that's just my nature. But because like as you said, and you can see this in so many sacred texts from all over the world and spiritual traditions that don't have text. Faith without works is dead. That's the way the Bible says it, right? You can have faith and be sitting there like, I'm manifesting this, but what are you doing though? Like,
yes.
What are you doing? And it can't just be like, I'm doing, but you may be doing the thing that you're not actually called to do.
Yes.
And the thing that you're called to do may feel scary or intimidated, overwhelming, and you don't know how, but that's where miracles happen. When you stop trying to be in charge and stop trying to be in control and stop trying to run the show, and you're like, I surrender. So, that's my thing is like, I grew up in the church, and although I don't identify as Christian, now especially, I'm like, there's so much that I learned growing up in the church that I appreciate in my adulthood. Like there's a song that we would sing that's like, I surrender all to you. Now we would say my blessed Savior. And again, I'm not really part of the Jesus as Savior thing, but like, to me, I think about that as God. Like, I surrender all. I surrender my will. I surrender my way I think it should be done. I surrender. And that makes room for miracles. Like, I'll give an example. My miracles happen to me every day, but I'll just give like a recent one. So I'm living in Thailand, and I love my apartment. It's pretty swanky, but I've been feeling like I'm ready to like, move somewhere that's a little where I can feel more connected. Mm-hmm. And a healer and a teacher, mentor of mine who I work with regularly was like, I'm getting the feeling that you're going to need to work with a woman who is of the land where you are. That's what she said. And so on Saturday, I went to this healing kind of community that this woman who is Thai and has this amazing healing center that she's built with her own hands. And I spent all day there, and she calls her home the land. But I was like, okay, she's Thai, she's of the land, she calls her home the land. And I wasn't feeling like, this is it. Now, I wasn't like, where is the land? I got to go find this woman and get on the, I've got to manifest this. No, because I trust that what is for me will not go past me, right? I trust that what I'm being called to is already manifest. I'm not manifesting anything. I'm just aligning with it. I'm just being open. I'm just being ready. I'm just being receptive. And so I'm not willing anything. I'm just like trusting the divine, trusting God, trusting divine timing. And so but I heard that. And then again, like you said, trusting my intuition. So even though this woman who is Thai, and I went to her healing center and it was called The Land, I was like, this might be part of my journey, but it's not the journey. So a couple of days later, I went and got a massage. And the woman, it's like a 3 parts, like a deep tissue massage that has oil and a hot bamboo and Thai massage. And I talked to her, and this is a different woman, mind you.
Okay.
And I was at this different healing. So there's a lot of body work and healing stuff you can get done where I live in Thailand. And afterwards, I was like, the woman who owned the center, different center where I was like, mentioned that you live in this place and that you live like in this really lush kind of village and da-da-da-da. So she showed me these pictures of her home, and I was immediately resonant, right? So I felt my intuition in my body. I immediately resonated with where she lived. Because the first time I met her, I felt drawn to her energy immediately. And I saw the land, and I was like, this is amazing. She lives in this huge house with all this open space, fruit trees, mango, all these fruit trees on her land. And there's a guest house that she rents out to Airbnb. And I was like, this is fascinating. I'm so drawn to this. So, right, paying attention to my intuition. Mm-hmm. And I said, she was like, oh, we're actually looking for a renter to take over our lease because we're going to go to the States. And I said, that's interesting. When are you looking to leave? And she said the beginning of May. My lease ends at the end of April.
Oh,
right. And so I have chills right now telling the story. I wasn't sitting there like, I've got to figure out. I had already in my mind, I knew what I wanted it to feel like. I knew what I wanted it to look like. I knew what I wanted it to, what I wanted my next place to be like. I knew I needed to be on the land. I knew I needed to be able to walk around. And she has all this land. It's green, it's lush. She has this house that's like wide and bright and has 2 stories. And there's a teak guest house that I could use for Airbnb to make extra income. Right. So that was a miracle to me, because I didn't have to do anything other than show up and have the conversation. Now, mind you, if I had not listened to my intuition and asked her about her land, if I had not followed up and been open to follow through on making an appointment with her, if I had not, now that's when we start talking ourselves out of miracles, because we don't know what's on the other side. And we're like, oh, I'm too shy. What if she doesn't like me? I'm nervous. Who am I to ask her about her home? I don't want to be rude. Whatever messages we tell ourselves, that's when we start missing stuff. Not because it's not there, but because we don't want to be uncomfortable. And I wasn't uncomfortable, but I think often we miss stuff because we're still trying to control the situation. We still think we have an idea of what it's supposed to look like. So that's just like the top of my head, one thing that just happened this week.
Oh yeah. And what's interesting there is like, you were still taking action. Like you weren't burning yourself out trying to figure out how this thing was going to happen, but you were still like, you're like, okay, let me ask, let me do this. And it wasn't just like, oh, okay, cool. Let's just see what happens. And I don't have to do anything at all. I don't have to, it's like, but seeing the signs, it's like you were seeing the signs and almost like little bits of the pathway were like opening up to you at a time. And then it all aligned in a perfect way, which is amazing.
Totally in a perfect way. And it's like this place, I could have retreats. I could, like I'm going to go see it. So I haven't gone to see it in person yet. And let's say I go and see it and it's not exactly what I want. Then I trust that that's still part of my journey. I'm still moving forward on the journey. I'm not stuck. Nothing is wrong. It's no tragedy. I'm just moving forward on the journey. And if I go and it resonates and it works, then I'll take the next step in that direction too. But it's really about, I think, surrendering to the process, because we don't know the outcome. We'll never know the outcome until the outcome happens. And even then it's continually unfolding. Yes,
exactly. It's continually unfolding. And I think we get really focused because, especially if you're like goal-oriented people like I am, we get really focused on like, this goal is the end. And it's like, it's not really the end. It's actually just like a stop. And that stop might change and it might be something else. Like that might not even be, that's the goal you're working towards now. It may not even be the goal that you're working towards in 3 months or in 3 years. So it's like this idea of like, it's on the path. There isn't like an end point really in your journey until you die. And then arguably that's not the end point either.
Exactly. That's why I say the infinitude or the infinity or the continuum. Like, it's like we are in a point right now. There's a prayer, in the infinity of life of where I am, all is perfect, whole, and complete. In the infinity of life where I am, all is perfect, whole, and complete. So that means like, we're in the infinitude, and in this point in the infinitude, all is well. It's not when I lose 5 pounds or make $150,000 or find the love of my life or get this degree. No, right now, this is a perfect moment for this moment. And the moment will shift and change like everything else in life.
Yes. And trusting that where you are in this moment is where you're supposed to be, even if it's not where you want to be.
Totally. Because
be like, I'm here for a reason.
Always. All timing is right timing. And once that's like a radical acceptance, all timing is right timing. Not sometimes, not the times I understand it, not when I can make sense of it. All timing is right timing. Yes. And then you can just like be in that. The first thing I say when I wake up in the morning to myself is, again, it's another thing from the Bible. What do I say? This is the day the Lord has made. I shall rejoice and be glad in it. Right. And so some people that has sung that in church, but it's a Bible verse, And for me, it's like, I give my day to God immediately. As soon as I open my eyes, before I open my eyes, I don't have to be in charge. God already made this day. I'm going to be rejoice and be glad in it. No matter what happens today, I'm just going to be glad. And
that is
keep going.
That is like next level. That's like, so sometimes I wake up and I'm like, damn, this is already a day that feels like a Monday and it's Friday, you know?
Right.
And so like I pull myself out of it, but it's like to be able to wake up and like in that moment, just really in like any moment to be able to immerse yourself in like the gratitude for the moment is, I feel like it takes practice.
It does, but it's like, it is a practice, right?
Oh, yes. That's a perfect way of phrasing it.
Mm-hmm. When you say to yourself, this is the day the Lord has made, I shall rejoice and be glad in it. Before you get on Instagram, before you start worrying about your to-do list, before you start thinking about your bank account, before anything, this is the day the Lord has made, I shall rejoice and be glad in it. And if we really want to get deep with it, I mean, this is so many things, but in the Lord, if we look at like the etymology of it, meant the law, right? And so the law of attraction isn't the only law. There are universal laws that we live by. And part of that is like the word is like setting your intention in the present moment. This is it. So when we declare dominion over our day already, we take Lord out of it and we say, this is the day that the law has made. I shall rejoice and be glad in it. Then you are like declaring that you are glad in it and that you have the power to be glad in it, no matter what happens. Then that shifts it from being like you are the victim of the day, but you are just the victor. You are present and the co-creator of your day.
Ooh, that is really powerful. That is really powerful. Oh my gosh, there's so many amazing, like juicy gems from this conversation. I can't wait to go back and listen to it and be like, wait, I got to remember what she said here. Like I'm going to go back and listen and take notes because this is so good. Oh, thank you so much for this conversation.
Thank you so much. I really enjoyed talking to you.
Where can people find you?
L'Erin Alta, LERIN ALTA at Instagram is my favorite place to hang out on the socials, and LerinAlta.com is my website.
All right. Yeah, Instagram is my favorite too. I still kind of dabble a little bit in Facebook, but it sort of gets my Instagram cast-offs. Like,
yeah, exactly.
Really hang out there and actually hang out there. Or sometimes it'd be like, I get my news from Facebook. What's happening in the news?
Right. What's going on in the world over here?
Yes. All right. So thank you so much for joining us. Everybody go and please connect with L'Erin. She has such, I follow you, so I know I can speak to, your amazing feed and just the wisdom that you're putting out in the world. So definitely go and connect with her. And we'd love to hear what you think of this conversation. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Kristen.
I don't know about you listeners, but for me, that felt like a journey into my own journey of spirituality. There are so many things in that conversation that help to expand my idea of really where I can explore as I still journey through this. So hopefully there were some gems in there for you. If you enjoyed this episode, please make sure you subscribe so you get new episodes, and rate and review this show where you listen, in particular on iTunes, because it will really help others to find this show and bring it out to more ears. Now, if you are enjoying this, if you want to see more episodes, I invite you to support this podcast on my Patreon page at patreon.com/Melanated Rising. I am a solo producer, so this will help to support me in continuing to produce this podcast and having these amazing conversations and bringing them out to you. Thank you so much for listening to this episode of Melanated Rising. Always remember to stand in your Black creative power.